here we are. This is Sex Love Psychedelics, and I'm your host, Dr. Kat, bringing you psychosexual conversations that will leave you intellectually turned on and hungry for more.
As you were talking, it made me think about the concept around heteroflexibility that I've been in more and more conversations about. And for anybody who's curious, I did an episode about bisexuality, curiosity, queer, pansexual. What do those mean? How can we move forward into that? But from your perspective, when you're working with men, how, I guess from my lens, I get men who say, yeah, I'm interested, I want to keep diving, but there's a block there. They're scared to step over that line of exploring with other men.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up heteroflexibility because, again, speaking of controversial terms, is a controversial term. I've heard, when I've spoken about it, I've gotten pushback from people. I mean, I don't presume that they're bisexual, but I've gotten pushback from people who are saying that heteroflexibility is bi erasure. And like, I've heard the arguments for that, and I can see it. I can definitely see where it can be. And then I like to apply that kind of like yes, and also like having the opportunity to explore sexuality and add more nuance and diversity to it, I think is also beneficial. And then there's also the counter argument to that, which is like, do we need more labels? And, do we need to have more micro identities and micro labels? That's definitely another conversation that I know people in the queer community are having. So I want to just acknowledge there's like multiple kind of things at play here. For me, I don't identify as bisexual. I don't think I'm bisexual. I think I'm heteroflexible. And the reason why is because and again, this is my personal definition, is because I don't want to have sex with men, but I enjoy and I don't mind, and it's pleasurable for me to be in a sexual context with other men. So I don't necessarily get turned on by men and have a desire to be sexual with them, firsthand, let's say. But like, if there's men in the space, then I don't mind like the eroticism and the charge around that. And so that's like why I personally would not call myself bisexual, but I'd probably say, well, there's flexibility to my heterosexuality.
Yeah.
Right. Because again, the definition that I use of heterosexuality is like very rigid. And maybe I wouldn't say heteroflexible if the stereotype of heterosexual is more open and we start to really challenge like what heterosexuality can mean, then by all means, I'd be like, yeah, I'm heterosexual within the context of like, I'm doing all these other things, and it's not just this like one narrow definition of what heterosexuality means, which is a lot of the connotations of heterosexuality, which is where the idea of queering heterosexuality comes from, is like opening up it a bit more and giving it nuance and space. But again, that's a controversial term. So that's like the caveat, I suppose, to this whole idea of heteroflexibility. Is like, I recognize there's a lot of things out here, and language is like, is such a funny thing. And I think it's really powerful as well. So that's why at the moment I'm using heteroflexible, because it still focuses on hetero, and maybe that's an over focusing on the hetero, but I don't know. It's an interesting conversation. So I had a big conversation with Joe Court about this, Dr. Joe Court, on my podcast. He's fantastic, and he talks a lot about heteroflexibility. And gets a lot of pushback for it as well, I might add. But the exploring of like your sexuality, and I say yours in like the men that are listening to this, I suppose, because that's who I'm really speaking to, is like so necessary and so valuable. And like, if I reflect on my own journey, I suppose, with my sexuality, like I very much subscribe to this idea that like, as a sexual man, this is what my sexuality had to look like. This is what my sexuality as a straight man had to look like, right? Like, I had to be the dominant partner, or I had to be the assertive partner, or I had to be the penetrative partner, right? Anatomically, the penetrative partner. I had to be the person that was in charge, the initiator, the pursuer, all these things, right? That are like really wrapped up in like masculinity and sexuality and the intersection of those two things. And when I started to like just let go of those stories, and it doesn't mean that I'm never assertive or never dominant or never penetrative, and I just do those things much more intentionally and mindfully now. But I also give myself the permission to be a bit softer, to be a bit more tender, to be penetrated, to be receptive, to be submissive, to explore like the range of, the smorgasbord of sexual experiences that are available to me as a human being. And that's what I kind of encourage men to do, is like, you try something twice, like you might try this particular sexual activity once and be like, I don't know, that was, kind of not exactly what I thought it would be. And I go, well, give it one more shot. And then, you can say, well, I gave it a red hot crack and it's not actually for me. Great. We all have sexual preferences. We all have things that tickle our fancy. We all have things that turn us off. You've just discovered something that turns you off, or you've discovered something that's a boundary for you. Or on the the flip side of that, you've discovered something that you enjoy and that turns you on. And usually that's where that's like where the growth is and the expansion is, typically, because that there's fear around that. Because like if there's a boundary there and they're like, this doesn't turn me on, then it can sometimes reinforce like, I'm straight and I'm heterosexual and I'm this, right? And it kind of reaffirms their identity. But if they discover something that they're like, whoa, this is pleasurable to me, this turns me on, oh God, maybe that like really rigid definition of what my sexuality and masculinity was isn't so rigid anymore, isn't so like, it starts, maybe the cracks start to appear and things start to waver. And there's this like new experience outside of that box that they put themselves in, which is enjoyable and pleasurable for them. And I think that's where that resistance and that growth and that like, that's what I like to see, at least anyways, when I'm with my clients. It's like this thing that's like really kind of shaking them a little bit, but also like that shaking is like in a good way. And if I can hold them through that and I can help them process that, then usually there's a lot of transformation on the other side of it. So that's like I don't know. I feel like I'm just ranting again.
It's
but that's
no. It's like primes us for continuing to question. Oh, well, if I realized that wasn't true, this deeply seated belief that I had, whether it was homophobia or around sensuality or being feminine or whatever it was, it gives us this reference point of what else am I believing or holding on to that isn't actually true for me.
Well, that was fun. Thanks for tuning in, lovers. And if you want to experience more ecstasy and sexual liberation, head over to sexlovepsychedelics.com and learn about how you can join me for any one of my online or live events. And while you're there, grab my free guide on sex and psychedelics. Remember, this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Please contact your healthcare provider and local law before pursuing any of the products or psychedelics discussed. And one final note here. I make this show specifically for you. If you're loving the show, then be sure to leave me a review in iTunes or Spotify to let me know. Happy to be here and happy to serve. I'll see you next time on Sex Love Psychedelics.